our congregation in Temple Shir Shalom, but really in the whole community, how can we still connect? How can we find those bridges and those in our relationships that connect us one to another when we're physically distant? And that's where this started from. But it's already evolved greatly in bringing friends into this conversation, into our study. And so today I have a newer friend to introduce to my community, and hopefully I get to play in his community as well, Rabbi Mike Moskowitz. And yes, we've been joking about this for a while because we are both blessed with this awesome name, thanks to our parents. But we have not spent time together until recently. And Rabbi Moskowitz today is a scholar in residence for trans and queer Jewish studies at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah in New York City, and has amazing stories, experiences to share of his own life and what he has learned, and to teach us now for a few moments too. But I want to share the way we were first brought together. I have to thank my daughter Ellie, because he wrote an essay, I think it was summer of 17 or 18, 2017, I think it was, and as an ally and talking about our understanding as Jews in the LGBTQ plus community and how important that was, and using the text that we're going to talk about in a moment of living in the image of God, of B'Tselem Elohim. And my daughter's friend saw this great essay and sent it to my daughter and said, "Oh my God, your dad's essay is so spot on. It's so good. He gets it. He understands it." And my daughter was thanking me for the essay. And I said, "Ellie, did you look at the picture, the byline of the rabbi with the essay? Same name, but we look a little bit different." We laughed. And from then, we had his kibbutz, Rabbi Moskowitz, and me, and connected. And there's been a few other times that we've been mistaken. Well, people have asked me for some insight in the LGBTQ community, and I realized I think they think I'm Rabbi Mike Moskowitz. So, Rabbi Moskowitz, if you'd like to share, introduce yourself, and start us off with a little something.
Sure. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Mike Moskowitz as well. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a scholar in residence for trans and queer Jewish studies at CVST, which is the world's largest LGBT synagogue. I work in allyship and advocacy. And as you know, sometimes allyship can be awkward because I'm not trans and I'm not queer. But it's predicated on the world being broken. If folks were not being dehumanized, then other people wouldn't need to stand up. So in this space of allyship, I think it's really important to recognize the role that we play, and that our stories are not necessarily first-person narratives. And part of our job is to amplify those voices. And so thank you for helping me to do that in conversation with you today.
Yeah, your voice, I think, is so important. As a traditional Jew, as someone who has you have gone through a number of yeshivot in Jerusalem, in New York, New Jersey, been ordained as an ultra-Orthodox rabbi, have served on college campus, and in this congregation have written extensively about this. I think for me, when I stand up and I'm supported as a man, as a straight man, cisgender, it's on some level, as a Reform Jew, as a progressive Jew, it's not a difficult thing. I did a wedding for two women in 1995, right, when it wasn't as prominent. And for me, although it wasn't, quote, legal at the time, it was a non-issue. And a lot of people saw it as such, even though there was some criticism of it in the Jewish community. I felt very confident standing up for that. However, I'm not ultra-Orthodox, right? And so the Reform movement often has taken progressive stands like this. But how do you get to where you are as a very traditional, as an Orthodox Jew?
Thank you. Yeah, I think had it not been for my own personal experiences and people in my family coming out as both queer and as trans, I don't know that I ever would have been able to get to a place of being even open to hearing or having this conversation. I think it's really easy to have prejudices, to hate people and things that you've never met or experienced. In fact, as a proof text, Jacob's brothers, when they seek to kill him, it says that they saw him from afar, right? From afar, you can have those kind of feelings. But as soon as you get to know somebody and they happen to be, right, trans or queer, then you realize that, well, people are people and they're lovely. And So I think had it not been for my own personal experiences, I never would have been open to it. And in fact, when somebody in my family said to me, like, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy, I had no traction. Like, what do you mean? How do you know? I know how I'm a boy. It's not the same. And really, it took a few weeks to get to what I think is a really evolved place of just knowing that I don't know. And that is actually really generative, right? On Purim, we talk about Adelo Yada, to get to that place of knowing that we just don't know. And so once I was able to see being cis as actually a limitation of awareness of gender to my own body, so then it became really easy to say, like, okay, so I don't actually understand at all what you're aware of, but I understand that it must be really hard in this world that doesn't also experience that for the most part. So what can I do to kind of be supportive? And so the issues within ultra-Orthodoxy are not text-based, right? God's not homophobic, God's not transphobic, but people really are, right? Just like God isn't racist, but there's a lot of racism. And so this has really been about destigmatizing, bringing awareness, amplifying the voice, letting people know that, we joke there's one in every million, because it's about 10% of society. So when people realize that we're not meant to answer questions, we're meant to answer people. And if religion is really about being in relationship to God as one's most authentic and genuine self, by denying the trans or queer experience, we're really excluding people from being able to be in relationship with God.
Yeah, it's refreshing to hear expressed that way. I also appreciate the fact that you talk as quickly as I do. And I think the reason being is that we want to get so much information out, and we know we have limited time. And I really appreciate that, because it shows the passion that we have as well. Can we delve into that text of B'Tselem Elohim? For me, I first, really got into that in depth as a unit head at camp when we were teaching that as a theme for the whole summer, and with 4th and 6th graders. I remember exploring it and really gaining sort of a sense of enlightenment and seeing how this is for all of us as humanity. And I put it up here, or I will, on the screen. So, but again, it was that first essay that that you shared too, that I found of yours, that brought me to that reality too. So I hope everyone can hear us. It is torrentially pouring here right now in Michigan. How is it in New York?
It is, it's dry. It's dry and sunny.
Well,
it's dry and sunny.
So here it is, Bereshit bara Elohim. So on beginning of creation, and in the end of the first chapter, we get, this idea that God makes Adam, humanity, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. God created, it says Oto, which we often translate as him, male and female. God created them, Nikeva bara Otam. So I know this has been something very powerful for you as well. So I wanted you to sort of delve into that for us.
Sure. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is in terms of a deviation, and I'll try to, for those people who can't listen as fast as I speak on this, but if people listen faster, it's really helpful. That when God creates the trees and the insects and the birds and the animals, it's each according to their own species, right, in great multitudes, each according to their kind. But that's not true about humanity, because there aren't different kinds of humans, right? There's just really actually one human, that the Talmud says that this is meant to provide some sort of humility, that we all go back to the exact same human. So how can we feel superior to another human when we all have the exact same roots? So that itself is an important kind of recognition in the context. The other that's really interesting, that when we think about gender, and gender being real or gender not being real, and the relationship between the social construction of gender, which needs to be dismantled, certainly for the trans experience, there needs to be an aspect of gender that's essential, or else, right, if men and women are exactly the same, there's no space to transition. I see gender as existing in attributes, and I see this one person being created in the image of God as having all of them, right? The male and female is before the split, according to Rashi and the Medrash. Right, God created one person. So if we see God as being the source of all gender, right, as being an all gendered God, so then we have one person who holds the spectrum of gender identity. And then that person, right, is then split into the male and female as the binary. Clearly, we all have unique blends and mixtures of all sorts of different gendered attributes. And so when we think about being created in the image of God, where God doesn't have an image, right, it really, I think, invites us to delve a little bit deeper to understand, like, what does that mean? right? So obviously in some way it means, well, God is compassionate, right? God is benevolent, God is a giver. We are also created in that way. Also, the Medrash tells us at the beginning of the Genesis narrative that the emptiness and void during creation was actually God's loneliness. We often think about, I think, we often relegate these types of needs to be seen and understood, held as being part and exclusively of the human experience. But really our tradition tells us that they come from the divine. And so it's not good for us to be alone because we're created in the image of God. It's not good for God to be alone because you can't give if you're all by yourself. And in fact, as we prepare for Shavuot, which I see as like God's coming out speech, right? The divine revelation is where God tells us who God is. But it was actually too painful for God, right? Just a month later, 40 days later, there's the sin of the golden calf, where God's like, I don't understand. I told you who I am. I'm the infinite source of the universe. How, like, why is this complicated? How can you be like praying to this, false God? Like, it means that you don't see who I am. And as a result, we've actually, with tremendous pain and suffering, forced God back into the closet, right? God is very hidden today because it's actually not a safe space for God to be out, because the needs that we have very much come from that space of the divine. And so as a result, when God said no in the garden and we didn't listen, God said, it's actually like, I'm not going to be in an unhealthy relationship with you, right? Like, and Nebuch, unfortunately, like God created that distance, right? And as a result, we're trying to emulate God to be able to say, no, we're worthy of being in relationship with you with great intimacy because we've learned the lesson, like we understand what it means to be able to respect the needs of another. And that's why, when we think about Tikkun Olam and Tikkun Olam, healing and fixing the world, just to translate.
Don't worry, I got it.
Yeah. It's really about fixing our mistake, right? That God created this paradise, right? God, there was no pain, there was no suffering, and then we broke it. And so when we think about emulating God and trying to be God-like, one of the ways that we can show God that we are worthy of being in a relationship to God as a parent is by taking care of all of God's children like siblings.
That's spectacular. I love the way that you look at that. How, and for some of us hearing it, it sounds almost, not just as a chidush, as sort of revolutionary and looking at it in that perspective, in that way. Do you find resonance in it within the traditional community? Or people saying, oh, wow, that's great? Or, because obviously, Beit Simchat Torah, the congregation that they're working in right now, is a progressive synagogue. Right, and its history is aligned in social activism and progressiveness. So you're not serving an ultra-Orthodox community. How does that work together?
Sure. Judaism is absolutely a religion of action, right? We're meant to love peace, but also pursue it. I actually met Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum in the back of a police wagon when we were both got arrested for civil disobedience a few years ago. And so I think that part definitely aligns with our tradition. However, Orthodoxy, ultra-Orthodoxy in particular, has been much more inwardly focused. Especially after World War II, creating almost, hermetically sealed communities because of the fear of the outside world. That being said, I think deep within our tradition, this is about the human experience. This is about being in relationship with God. These are things that transcend kind of the reaction, certainly to the Enlightenment and other sort of reactionary moves of Chassidus and the Yeshiva movement. So there's no shortage within our tradition about the need to prioritize human dignity and respect. But and in fact, in having conversations with rabbis in Lakewood and the people who adjudicate halachic decisions, if you take away the homophobia and the transphobia, it's actually not complicated at all. I was in a synagogue in my neighborhood in Lakewood, and the rabbi asked me to come over. I was sitting with somebody of trans experience, somebody who had transitioned female to male. And he called me into his office and he said, look, people are complaining. And I said, well, I spoke to the head, rabbi of yeshiva, and he said there's nothing wrong with it. And then we started speaking Jewish law, and immediately he cut me off. He said, this is not about halacha. This is not about Jewish law. This is about people feeling comfortable. And that's how every system of oppression works, right? That people are limited to those of privilege, of entitlement, of access. And we need to kind of perpetuate people who have access feeling comfortable in that space, even if it, and often because it excludes people who are actually in need to do the things that we're all there to do, to be in relationship with God. So God does not put extra people in this world. God does not make mistakes. And our tradition teaches that God does not show up to pray in a place where God's children are excluded. And so the idea that we're going to create a sanctuary that's only for the privilege is of the most sacrilegious acts. God doesn't show up, and it's not a sanctuary, right? To protect those who don't need protection is not the idea of a sanctuary domain.
Yeah. I agree completely. What's fascinating to me as well is that, I saw you initially as a scholar in the trans queer community and bringing enlightenment to that and understanding to that, which obviously is so needed and important. But as I read more of your writing and heard more, I realized it really is that social justice activism, that work on immigration, work on climate and environmentalism, and I appreciate that passion that drives you as well. I'll leave it at that for this moment. I'm really, in a sense, in awe because of what you've been able to create and do. What do you see the future of your work being engaged in?
Well, thank you for the generous and kind words. I think there's some planned obsolescence here. Like, I hope to become obsolete. I hope that the world can heal. I hope that somebody of trans experience, because of the gender divide within the ultra-Orthodox world and the way in which rabbis will only respond to male presenting folks, and women there don't get the same education yet, right? It'll take some time for somebody else to be in this position. But I hope that the progress, which has been substantial, it's happening very quickly. It's the best it's ever been in the ultra-Orthodox world. I think when we talk about systemic change, that they're very much incremental markers in different gradations. So I think historically it started with intolerable deviancy. Like, if you come out, you have to get out. There is not space. More and more young people don't want to choose between a religious identity and a queer identity, or a religious identity and gender identity. And so it's for sure pivoted in most places to maybe a tolerable deviancy. Like, it's not okay, but we'd still rather you be here than leave. And then as people get to know people, right, and realize that in every family there are people of these experiences, so then it can come to acceptance and then celebration. There are people within the ultra-Orthodox community that we call stealth, right? They pass that live among in the identity that they have embraced and see themselves as, and live in some level out as their gender, but perhaps closeted as trans. For those in the gender nonconforming community, and of course, when we talk about communities, right, like, there's no Jewish community, there's no trans community, right? There are a bunch of people who we kind of put into a space. Certainly within Jewish law, it's more complicated. Law and Jewish law is no different. Wants lines and boundaries, and there's a meta question where gender lies, and is there a moment that we can kind of pinpoint in a person's personal transition that we can say that Jewish law now validates and affirms the new identity. And it could be that we don't have access to that information, but there's an urgency to be able to provide reasonable responses for people to be able to be part of gendered spaces and gender-based spiritual practice. And so a lot of the work is in seeing what's at stake.
I'm confident that already in what you've done in your years of doing this, few years doing this now, you've helped a lot of people and healed people as well, and given them a sense of comfort and calm in their life, and being able to be true to who they are and feeling very validated in that and how important that is. And I hope, as you've given me more words to be able to share and help myself understand, I love your allyship, the word of chaver, chaver up that you talk about. And you can learn more of what Rabbi Mike Moskowitz is teaching. Here's his book. Is it backwards in the screen? Probably. It's Textual Activism. A book came out about a year ago, and a collection of his essays and teachings. And so available at Amazon.com. This is brought to you by. I was excited to get the book and to be reading it and preparing and thinking about this too. But I'm also excited about our newer friendship. And I look forward to one day when we can travel, that you'll come to Michigan and you'll spend some time with us and teach us some more as well. I think it's really been a gift to get this time together, these few minutes, these brief minutes, but to start our week with that understanding of the inclusiveness in our world that's necessary, and the idea of, yeah, it is part of Tikkun Olam, of the brokenness that we see and what we need to help fix and help one another, and how valuable that is to live with every single day. And you inspire us with that. And I personally greatly appreciate it, and I'm thrilled that we've had this time to study together and to learn from you and have you as our teacher. So what began as just the fun in our names continues on, and I look forward to more teaching we can do together as well. And thank you from Temple Shir Shalom for being our teacher this morning.
Thank you very much for having me. Such a pleasure.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.